So I'm a vet and I specialize in farm animals, livestock, and particularly horses. This means I'm often on call and working the night shift. I was on a call on this particular night when this happened, and I thank the Lord that I was, and also wish that I wasn't. It was not a nice night, but ultimately I feel like if I haven't been there, at least 2 other human beings would be dead, if not 3, and a horse, which to me is just as important. I was on a call watching some garbage on Netflix when my cell phone rang. It was Irene Capson, one of the 2 ranch owners along with her husband, who lived out on Iron Road Way. Now, I was a big fan of the Capsons. They'd been clients of my father before me when I was still just a little girl and longed to join the family business. They were in their late 60s, and they only called if there was a really, really good reason to. They were the kind of farmers who rarely had need for a vet because they knew how to take care of things themselves, for better or worse. And this was one of those cases that was worse, though. Their eldest, most beloved mare, Dapple, was on his last legs and there was nothing they could do to ease his pain, and that meant that it was up to me. It was a 40-minute drive to the Capson Ranch, but it took me about an hour in the dark, as a careful and somewhat paranoid driver, especially on country roads, which are absolute death traps if you've ever had to navigate them at night. When I pulled up at the Capson Ranch, I cursed because my Jeep had already gotten stuck in the mud, which was unusually left without sawdust. I was also a little concerned because, as well as the Capson's vehicles, there was an ATV I didn't recognize. It didn't even look new, but I guess it could have belonged to one of the ranch workers. Irene Capson had told me that it would only be her and her husband present at the ranch, though, and to meet them in the barn, so alarm bells were already kind of ringing in my mind. The first thing I did was grab my heavy, highly important equine medical case from the back of my Jeep, and then, cursing again as I waded through the mud, almost losing my gumboots multiple times, I headed toward the barn. Now, before I even reached the barn, I could tell something was wrong. Now, the door was open more than a crack, and I could hear an unfamiliar voice coming from inside, who did not sound at all friendly. I managed to find a crack in the barn slats that allowed me to spy through without hopefully getting noticed, and the narrative I began to piece together filled me with incredible dread. A younger man held the Capson couple at shotgun point. I could make out everything they were saying. I won't recount it at all because a lot of it simply involved the younger man, whose name was Daniel, cursing a lot at his parents. He was throwing some really vile, unrepeatable language out there, things I'd be ashamed to say to anyone, let alone my own parents. And that's something else I learned. Daniel was their son. His purpose for being at the farm was to try and persuade the couple to loan him $30,000. He made no secret of the fact that this would help fund his lifestyle, which largely seemed to involve taking meth and some kind of lunatic plan to set up a lab with his friend. Apparently, the friend was providing the lion's share of the funds, and the Capsons were begging Daniel to realize that this was a scam. There would be no meth lab. They would not become the real-life Walter and Jesse, and at best, he would blow the money on drugs. Daniel's response to this was to threaten to blow them away and simply take everything he could. He claimed he knew the safe code, and as much as it would destroy him to kill his own parents, it would destroy him even more if he couldn't get the money. I knew I had to step in. I snuck away from my spy hole and slipped through the crack in the door. Now, the kid hadn't noticed me, and neither had Irene Capson. Unfortunately, the dad Capson did notice me and couldn't stop the look of relief from crossing his face. And while I was flattered that Mr. Capson saw me as their savior, it did unfortunately mean that the younger Capson's son saw me as a threat. He whirled around. The shotgun was now pointed at me. I just stammered and stuttered, almost peeing myself because I had never had a gun pointed at me before. I faced down angry charging bulls. I've been kicked by a horse. I've climbed a tree to avoid 30 to 50 feral hogs. Now, granted, it was more like 7, but that's not a joke, and I operated on a tiger who started to wake up during the procedure. I've calmed an angry hippo, but nothing has left me as terrified, as shaken, and unsure as the young Daniel Capson pointing his gun at me. I'd almost forgotten what I was there for, and then I noticed his eyes flicked to Dapple in the stall nearest me. Without taking his eyes off me, he asked his parents, "Is Dapple okay?" And I remembered from growing up as a little kid when he was a teen that Dapple had been his horse, his beloved horse, back before whatever the hell happened to him happened. Now, over his shoulder, Irene admitted that no, Dapple was not okay, that I'd been called to the ranch late at night to see if there was anything I could do to ease Dapple's suffering. Then Mr. Capson started pleading with his son, begging him, asking him if that's really what he wanted Dapple's final memory of his beloved boy to be. And at first I thought that Daniel was too far gone, that his love for drugs outweighed his love for Dapple, and then he began to cry and asked me if I could save him. I lied and said yes. I told him that I needed to reach into my medical bag to grab some equipment to help make Dapple better. Not many people know this, but some vets carry pistols as part of their medical kit, particularly vets who specialize in horse care. It's often the easiest and most painless way to put a horse to sleep, a bullet through the center of the brain. And that hadn't been the plan for Dapple, let me just say that, but it was certainly my plan for their son. I pulled the pistol out, aimed it at him, and unwaveringly told him to drop the shotgun. Daniel was a broken man at this point. He told me through tears that the shotgun wasn't even loaded, that he'd never shoot his parents, and that I could shoot him in the head if I wanted to end his pain, as long as I promised to do all I could for Dapple. I had no such intention of shooting him, but I did demand that he drop that gun. However, to all of our horror, the shotgun was loaded. I'm guessing by accident or somehow including a single shell left over. The gun bounced off a wooden plank on the barn floor and managed to fire into the ceiling. It scared everyone but caused no damage, thank God, but it caused the other 3 horses in the barn to go absolutely crazy. So now I was surrounded by 3 screeching, braying horses, as well as a wailing Capson family. From the fact they'd all collapsed to the ground at this point and pulled each other into a reconciliatory family hug, I figured I was safe. I still made a point of grabbing the shotgun and tossing it out of the barn, then immediately went to Dapple. The rest can be summarized here, though. Dapple, despite being an old horse, just had an infection. He wasn't dying, and I was able to save him, and the local cops showed up before any of us had a real chance to call them. The current deputy sheriff grew up with Daniel, was one of his best friends in fact, and between all of us and an unwillingness to ruin Daniel's life even further, we were able to avoid any criminal charges. The caveat was that he had to spend the required amount of time in a rehab facility, which, to his credit, he has. 5 years later, Daniel was a head rancher on the farm, giving his parents a chance to enjoy semi-retirement. I'm his go-to veterinarian, and I'd spend a lot of time there. Now, I wouldn't say that we're romantically close, but we are becoming good friends. Sober, clean Daniel is the lovely, lively, smart teenager that I remember. So while that was the most terrifying night shift of all time and the most terrifying moment of my life, I can't help but feel proud. I saved a family, I saved a man from addiction, and most importantly, I saved a horse. Dapple lasted a few more years until he passed away peacefully in his sleep, and Daniel is currently training Dapple Jr., and I'll be honest, I'm putting a little extra effort into that horse's medical care and upkeep. A dark story with, at least currently, a happy ending, and I wish they could all end like this. I work at a grocery store that I won't name in Detroit, and I work almost exclusively on the third shift, so thankfully I don't have to deal with customers, and I spend most of my time stacking shelves and doing busy work. It might not sound like a glamorous job, but it's something to earn me a little money while I finish my college degree, which I'm actually set to graduate with honors. Now, it's very, very rare that anything weird happens during the third shift. Some of the workers can be a bit weird, but aren't we all who work at night? No, I'm just projecting, but I usually arrive at the store during closing time, by which all the customers have been tossed out on their butts. I don't know what happened in this particular case. Maybe she was hiding in the bathrooms or tucked away in a display or God knows what. But short version shorter, there was an elderly female customer left in the store with us when it should have been just us workers. Now maybe you'd imagine her wandering around lost or looking for her dead husband or demanding to know where we keep the pasta. Aisle 3, by the way. But no, she snuck through the whole of the store unseen, like solid freaking snake, and none of us had a clue that she was even in the store for the first hour of our shift. Now, the first sign that something was wrong was a sudden foul smell emanating from the fish department. Myself and my colleague Cherry rushed over there, curious as to what had suddenly caused a fish to just go rotten. Had a tuna exploded or something? But nothing could have prepared us for what we saw. The old woman had crawled inside the iced fish display, which was actually due to be emptied by one of us at some point, and she was rolling around inside of it, tearing fish apart with her bare hands and somehow treating them like her worst enemies. We watched in horror and, I guess, kind of amusement. We could only stare as she saw the goddamn octopus sitting there, some kind of delicacy that they'd imported in because God knows why. Apparently people eat these things, and squid. And she was muffled by the glass, but we heard her screaming something like, "There you are," at the octopus, and began trying to tear into it. Now, octopi are stretchy and pretty hard to just tear with your hands, so this old lady had the brilliant idea to just sort of gnaw on the octopus with her teeth. Only it turns out that she wore dentures, and after a number of attempts of biting the octopus's tentacles off, she got her dentures stuck in its forehead. Thankfully, someone had called the cops by now who showed up, but it was like nobody wanted to intervene. We wanted to see what she'd do next, and unfortunately, what that involved was smashing her way out of the glass cabinet housing the fish, creating an even more disgusting smell as she charged towards us. We soon realized that there was more to it than fish. She'd soiled herself. Now, this might all seem funny to you, and frankly, it was right up until this moment. Then, covered in broken glass and bleeding profusely from shards, she lunged at Cherry, tackled her, calling her an octopus woman and accusing her of inserting eels into various orifices, and I think some troll grandson of hers had shown her some of the famous shock memes and it had just broken her brain. And the whole thing ended with the cops having to actually tase her and try to bring her down, but she was having none of it. She somehow withstood the entire taser blast. I guess it was pretty weak since they thought that she was just some old woman. And then she charged back to the fish counter, grabbed as much seafood as she could carry, and then jumped on Cherry again. Now, the next thing we know, she's trying to force an entire octopus down Cherry's throat while whipping me with some eel, and I know it sounds funny as hell, but it was honestly terrifying at the time. The fish were pierced with broken glass, and she was forcing broken glass down Cherry's throat, and she was pierced with broken glass herself, meaning that she was cutting Cherry up. And so here's the final kicker. The old woman wasn't an old woman at all. She was an old man who had made a living as a fisherman and lost his livelihood thanks to commercial fishing and grocery stores like ours switching from locally sourced produce. He had dressed as his wife because after he went bankrupt during the Great Fish Recession, she died of a heart attack, and he blamed just about everyone he could, but mostly us. Apparently our store chain had been his biggest local client, and so it ended up being a tragic and horrifying and scary incident. Cherry suffered severe damage and bleeding to her trachea, as well as some scars all over her body from the broken glass, and the store managed to keep almost all mention of it out of the papers, and the poor psychotic fisherman was taken away to spend his remaining years in psychiatric care. I still work at the grocery store on third shift, but hopefully not for much longer after I graduate. Cherry's doing just fine now, but we all insisted that we were not willing to stock imported octopi in the fish counter from there on in. Word of advice: never work in a gas station at night. This might sound kind of dramatic, but I'd rather crawl over broken glass, work down in the sewers, or be Hassan Piker's dog than work night shift at a gas station again. Maybe day shift is better, but my a-hole boss, who I really want to call a slur but don't want to get you demonetized, forced me to work night shift and night shift only. I was a 22-year-old high school dropout who'd spent 6 months in juvie and bounced from foster family to foster family, so I guess I was lucky enough to find work at all. But good God, I am very sure that it wasn't legal to force a 22-year-old to work 5 night shifts a week every week without ever changing to day shifts. And there were a lot of things about Gary's gash and groceries that weren't strictly legal, but I'm not a rat, and Gary's been buried in the ground for nearly 20 years now. Not to mention the fact that I'm now with his daughter and she has my kid on the way, so I gotta play nice. So I'm not trying to sound like some jerk here, but Lana, Gary's daughter, is the one baiting me to write this right now. I'm actually a very nice guy in my personal life, and I'm gonna pop the question to Lana before our baby boy is born. You know, what's a better place for a proposal than a freaking Let's Read video? Lana, you make me the happiest I'd ever been, and I can't wait to raise our son with you. Now, through the power of Joel of the Golden Voice, I'm asking, will you marry me? Now, let's quickly move on to the story in case she says no. If she says yes, though, well, this will be the first serious proposal you performed on the channel, and I hope so. Now anyways, the point is, Gary was a greasy, greedy dude, and let's just say that I'm glad Lana inherited certain things from her Catholic mother rather than certain things from her father. But enough about that. We had some absolutely effing weirdos who dropped in during the night shift. There was this one guy who would spend a sickening amount of money on scratch cards, and I don't think he ever won a single cent. And from the way he dressed, he was clearly trailer trash too, and a few times I remember saying, "Buddy, do you think you should cool it with the gambling? I'm genuinely concerned about you." And you know how he responded? He hissed at me. Not even a word, he just hissed. After 3 times that, I just gave up. So there was that scratch-off jack-off, and then there was the 7-foot-tall man who came in at precisely 2 a.m. every day and bought a single Red Bull, a pack of Marlboro Lights, and one of those massive pickles in the plastic packets. Just those 3 items every single time. And the guy looked like he was about 90 as well, and sure, he was a skinny mofo, but there was absolutely no way that I was questioning him on his purchases, especially not after the hissing gambler. Now finally we had this kid, and he looked about maybe 8 tops, who would come in at around 5 in the morning every single Tuesday and Thursday and would ask if we had any X-Men trading cards for sale. And I explained to him every single time that we didn't sell trading cards of any kind, but that didn't put him off. He'd be there every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork, and when I told him no, he looked so upset and despondent, really. And so one day I went to the local comic shop and just got like 6 little packs of X-Men trading cards. And when the kid came in next, I presented him with the packs because surely one of them was the right brand that he was looking for. And the kid looked at the pack of cards, called me a retard, and then threw the packs back at me and stormed out. Now to this day, I have no idea what I did wrong. The guy in the comic store told me that these were all X-Men trading cards that existed, but I guess I really don't know what I guess, but I never saw the kid again anyway, and that was kind of a relief. And I'm pretty sure that in the future, someone met this kid, and he was the inspiration for that Duck song about the lemonade and the grapes, and if you know, you know, Google it. Now speaking of kids and short people, it's time to start the creepiest of these stories. I'm standing at the counter, minding my own business, when I just hear this rich, deep voice demand that I cook him a hot dog because all the ones on the machine are overcooked and look like crap. I glance over and yeah, fair enough. The hot dogs had been on rotation for about 3 days if I knew Gary, so a fresh batch wasn't out of the question. The problem was, I had no idea where the request had come from. The voice demanded that I get a move on and said that he didn't have all day. And so I leaned over the counter, trying to get a better view of the store, and that's when I saw a little person standing as close to the counter as he could get without face planting. Now, I'll admit I was a little thrown that he decided to position himself somewhere that would clearly not be visible to me, but whatever. Now, I apologized profusely and said that I had no idea that he was a little person. And the guy just sort of harumphed and huffed and said that calling him a little person was deeply offensive. And so in my infinite wisdom, I apologized again and said, "I'm sorry, I meant midget." and I saw his face go red with fury, and I knew that I messed up. Now, I scoured my mind. What else did small folk like to be called? Now, this was back in the 80s, so the differences weren't as well known then. And the man explained that he had dwarfism, and so obviously I should refer to him as dwarf. Now, fair enough. I have no problem with that, and I will refer to people however they want. I guess the thing that riled me up is that during my first time in juvie, I took an extremely nasty acid attack to the face, and it left me permanently disfigured and blind in one eye, so I clearly wasn't so intentionally ableist against people with different body types, but that's neither here nor there. I told the dwarf that I would happily make him a new hot dog if he'd head over to the machine with me so I could cook the wiener to his perfect perfection. And somehow, of course, this managed to offend the fella tremendously again, and he began screaming at me in what sounded like a Shakespearean monologue about how he shouldn't have to move, and it was my job to go and cook him a hot dog with all the trimmings and blah blah blah. No, actually, it wasn't. It was a self-service hot dog machine, but I wasn't going to argue. I told him that I'd head over and cook him up the best hot dog he'd ever had. Now, the dwarf replied by saying that it was too late now. I'd screwed everything up, and it was time to face the consequences. In complete shock, I watched as the little man rose to his full height of around 6 foot. At the same time, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a sawed-off shotgun. He told me that if I went for the panic alarm or anything like that, he'd blast a hole in my chest the size of a foot-long hot dog. And you know what? Screw it. Screw Gary. I wasn't getting killed over a job that barely paid enough for me to live and forced me to work 5 nights a week at Gary's. And I told the now 6-foot dwarf to chill and emptied the register for him. He filled a bag that he'd produced from nowhere and gave me a very cruel smile and just strutted out of the gas station. Or he almost did. For some reason, he paused to unload a shotgun round into the hot dog station and blasting that thing into pieces, leaving my ears ringing, and then he left. Now, my heart was pounding harder than it had when I'd done 4 lines of, well, never mind. Immediately, I pressed the panic button and I called 911 for good measure. Screw Gary. Those cops could actually wake him up. And so when the cops got here, we discovered a bunch of things. 1, Gary was too cheap to actually buy an outdoor security camera, so that one was actually fake. And so we had absolutely no footage of this fake dwarf leaving the premises. However, the interior cameras did work and I was able to see how he'd tricked me. He'd been kneeling on shoes, positioned in a perfect practice pose, so I had no chance of seeing his real legs. This explains why he didn't want to accompany me to the hot dog machine, though. And hilariously, this fake dwarf had been the suspect in a bunch of local robberies. He'd never fired his weapon before, and you know what got him caught? The fact that he took the time to shoot the crap out of that hot dog oven. Now, they were able to trace that buckshot of the gun to the owner and get his ass busted. He'd robbed enough places that I'm pretty sure that he'd actually die behind bars. What a shame. And as for me, I got my ass absolutely chewed out by Gary for handing over the cash and not risking my life by grabbing the baseball bat under the counter. I quit on the spot. I got my life together and I went back to school. I graduated, then got a degree, and some years later I met a woman that I fell head over heels for. Now imagine how shocked I was when I discovered that she was Gary's daughter, and hated him even more than I did. We originally bonded over drinks, where she shared our glee that he was dead, and now I know I sound like an ass, but you didn't know the man. He wanted me to die rather than hand over $200 or so to a fake dwarf. Screw Gary, screw the fake dwarf. I work in a very lucrative field now, and my life's freaking awesome. And that's why I'm writing to another awesome person, you, Let's Read, and I hope you enjoyed my story of a bunch of weirdos, at least one of whom nearly murdered me, and if you didn't, well, I know people who will shove a hot dog where the sun don't shine. Have a beautiful day. Hi, Joel. I grew up in Britain, although my parents are French. You'd never know it, though, because I have the most posh, London-sounding accent that a French girl could ever have. This might be because of the school that I went to or because I left school in college and I took some time out before university to work as an air hostess. I loved that job and ended up staying in the air for 5 years. Not literally, of course, but you get what I mean. I left sixth form college in 1997, and the story that I'm about to share with you took place in 1999. This was a couple of years before, everything changed with the planes, and security was very different back then. Things were a lot more lax, and it was much easier to get up to high hijinks. For one thing, you could still join the Mile High Club without too much trouble. Not that I ever did that, of course. I honestly would never. I shouldn't joke about that kind of thing, considering the story that I'm about to share with you, or joke about anything, really. So this story took place on the first ever red-eye flight that I was working. I'm sure everyone knows what a red-eye flight is by this point, but if by some small chance you don't, it's a flight, generally a shorter one, that takes place at night and often involves the passengers sleeping for the duration. If you take the red-eye, you're meant to stay quiet, calm, and well-behaved. I can't remember if kids were flat-out banned from our red-eye flights, but I don't ever remember any kids or babies on the handful that I worked. Now, this was 27 years ago, so bear with me. I've not worked as an air hostess for almost as long, and I haven't thought about planes in a long time. From what I can recall, the plane, run by some long bankrupt airline that you probably never heard of, was divided into 2 sections. The front section, closer to the cockpit, was for passengers who wanted to stay quiet and chill but weren't intending to sleep. It was the cheaper option and usually the busier one. Then the back of the plane, in reverse of the usual, was sort of the first class section, except this was for people who wanted or needed to sleep, so it was filled with bed seats. I was working up front, which suited me just fine because I didn't want to tiptoe around snoring old businessmen. And the sleeping area always smelled like farts too, so that was lovely. A red-eye typically doesn't have as many flight attendants as a regular flight, or at least it didn't back then. I think there were just 3 of us on that flight, although I could be misremembering. What I do remember is that I was up front, obviously, and my dear, queer, gentle friend Adam was working the sleeper section. Do you remember H from Steps? I don't know if Steps was that big in the United States, so maybe you never knew him, Joel, but if not, Google him and stick a picture up on screen if you can. Adam looked just like H from Steps, only he was a lot calmer, quieter, and more gentle than H, who always seemed like he had the energy of 50 men. Now make sure you Google H from Steps and not his real name, Ian Watkins, otherwise you might get that nunce from Lost Prophets, another singer who unfortunately shared a name. Now, he did some really, really terrible things, and you should do a true crime story about him one day, actually. That'd be actually very interesting. He was shanked in prison recently, too. Died. What a tragedy. Now, anyways, Adam was like a really calm and gentle H from Steps, and I promise this is important eventually. Partly it's important because the villain of this story, who we'll call Ian, looked kind of like the Lost Prophets guy. Although he wasn't really famous at the time and we didn't know he was a major criminal, so maybe I'm just misremembering. I'll call him Ian anyway because nearly every guy called Ian I've ever met was a proper prick, if you get me. Except for my cousin Ian, who's an actual right laugh. So anyways, back to the red-eye. Because I was working at the front of the plane, most of the passengers ate late-night airline food, and that meant that it was my job to collect up the trays with their rubbish on them. Now, I did this on autopilot, pun intended, sticking them on my trolley with a little "thank you, sir," or "thank you, ma'am," or "thank you, lovely," if they were some old biddy who was so wrinkled that they could have been a lad or a lass, or how do I put this tactfully? Someone who was very, very large and made it impossible to tell their gender. Now anyways, you had to be really careful about that back then. Christ, I feel bad for air hostesses in the 2020s, and I bet there had to have been some actual moments where a 20-year-old sweetheart had called a bearded passenger sir and been chewed out for not recognizing that they were a pretty princess. Oh Christ, I shouldn't have had those last couple of glasses of wine before writing you this email. Now anyways, I got my trolley full of trays and crap to the center of the plane and began chucking away the plastic boxes that the dinner had come in. And that's when I noticed it. A napkin with writing scrawled across the whole thing. "I know what you did on that plane," they'd written. and then a crude picture of what was definitely supposed to be me because, well, I could just tell, okay? Now, there had only been about 7 or 8 passengers who'd had dinner, so the note couldn't have come from too many people. I don't know why I even cared, because I hadn't done anything on any plane by that point, but the drawing had been very rude and insulting, and I was young, so I guess I felt kind of threatened by it. It didn't take long for me to notice Ian, even in the low, dim lights of the red-eye flight. Now, he was a guy about my age with slicked back hair and a goatee that made him look like a proper wrong'un. Now, he kept giving me the evils, looking at me like I was a bit of dog poo on the sole of his shoe, but then also sometimes like he wanted to lick it. Now, I'm going to stop this comparison there because I'm squeaking myself out, but you get the idea. I was disgusted by him, but he still wanted a piece of that, you know? And so I guess he was watching when I was looking, and he saw me looking, and then he started calling me over and asking for things like, "Hey girl, can I get a bottle of water?" Or, "Got any napkins? I seem to have lost mine." And my favorite, "Way up, whoa lass, can you handle these nuts for me? I haven't had any complimentary airline peanuts yet. So, can you get them?" And that's what he said, word for word, and I swear on the Bible about it. As an air hostess back then, at the dodgy flight company I worked for, you were taught to always smile, be as flirty as possible, and take as much crap from passengers as you could tolerate. I remember once, before this red-eye, I got chewed out for telling a passenger off after he touched my butt, and he said it was an accident and apologized, so apparently I was in the wrong for muttering perv under my breath as I walked off. Now anyway, after I gave Ian his nuts, he called me back again about 10 minutes later and said that they really were salty, and then he asked me if I liked salty things, which I pointedly ignored. And so he just laughed and said he needed another bottle of water and asked if I could be a good girl and go fetch him one. Of course, I did just that. What I didn't realize was that Ian got right out of his seat and followed me into the middle of the plane, where we kept things like bottled water and complimentary peanuts. The bathrooms were nearby, so at first I wasn't alarmed by the sensation that someone had followed me. Unfortunately, it was Ian, and he wasn't headed to the bathroom. Instead, he grabbed me, pinned me against the wall, and shoved some kind of hand towel against my mouth to gag me. And then he leaned in close and started whispering in my ear about what a terrible person I was. He didn't say it exactly like that, obviously. He said some proper vile stuff. Stuff that now, as a grandmother in my early 50s, I'd give a lad a good lick in the dick for. But back then, though, I was just a little wee thing and I was terrified. I started crying almost immediately, and Ian was all cruel and callous, saying that I brought this on myself. And he said I'd betrayed him after what I did on the last flight, and asked how I was okay with throwing away 7 years of our relationship. And that's when I realized that this guy somehow believed that I was someone totally different, specifically his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, who was also apparently an air hostess and had cheated on him on a flight. I didn't know it at the time, but his brain was absolutely fried from a cocktail of alcohol, MDMA, and coke, which I guess explains his temporary insanity. And things escalated when he tried to force me into the bathroom, pushing the hand towel so deep into my throat that I couldn't even try to scream. None of the passengers were turning around, and it was just me and Ian and a curtain separating us from the sleeper section. Now, the best I managed was slapping the wall, trying to do some type of SOS. I got maybe 2 short slaps in before Ian grabbed me between the legs over my skirt and squeezed in a way that made it very clear that he'd do worse if I kept going. I guess my beloved friend H heard the slapping because suddenly I saw all 5'5" of him peeking through the curtain, and then holy God, he stormed toward Ian, and then holy God, he yanked him off of me. My gentle, sweet buddy H didn't hesitate. He smashed his forehead into Ian's face, and the crunch of a bone sounded like a gunshot in that silent plane. And then H was yelling that a man was trying to assault his colleague, and H absolutely bodied him. It turned out he was a brown belt in Krav Maga. He floored Ian in seconds, tied him up with plastic ties, and even broke bones in his foot when Ian tried to kick out. Ian spent the next 3 hours hogtied in an out-of-order bathroom next to a toilet full of poop. We radioed ahead, and police were waiting at Heathrow. This Ian guy was arrested immediately, and after that, things changed. I became more cautious, I went to therapy eventually, and I gained a whole new respect for H. I stayed in the job for another 3 years and then left, and life moved on. But I'll never forget the terror of that night, or the man who saved me. I'm a 35-year-old woman, and I work as a nurse. I've done so for the last 10 years now. Now, I doubt it's a career that you can really relate to, being a literary expert and linguistic YouTuber, but it feels like we live in entirely different worlds altogether, although apologies if I'm wrong. Now, maybe you have family who worked in the profession, and I'll admit I'm not a die-hard regular viewer, but I love it when your videos come on autoplay and actually help me sleep. Some friends of mine encouraged me to email this story in, so I hope I'm making the right call in doing so, and I think it was scary as HE double hockey sticks anyways. So this story takes place when I was 25. I'd already done a degree, so I was on a fast-track program at nursing school, a little 2-year qualification. Now this meant that there was a lot of the on-the-job training early on, which suited me just fine. I've been in school since I was like 4 years old, and I was eager to put the books away and start emptying bedpans or inserting suppositories into people's butts. And maybe the whole sometimes saving people's lives things. I don't know, I forget why I got into the profession. Now anyways, as a part of my training, I was required to spend 2 months working on a number of different wards. Really, they just wanted to toughen us up and throw us into the deep end. I'd already done a stint in the pediatric floor, an oncology floor, and a burns unit. Now, it was absolutely insane, particularly the burns unit, honestly, and I'm pretty sure I could spend a whole story talking about what various types of burns do to the human body. And I would traumatize your listeners more than half the serial killer or stalker stories did that they might have heard. Now, I was pretty relieved when my next assignment seemed like the administration were giving me a break. Now, I was set to spend 2 months working on a coma ward. I mean, okay, yeah, this was emotionally pretty devastating, but it was pretty different from consoling a guy whose face had been permanently disfigured by an electrical fire and whose nerve endings would never, ever stop reminding him of this fact, let alone the visual aspect. But just thinking about it now, and this one guy in particular, it honestly breaks my heart, and I'm not going to talk about him or even think about it. Instead, let's talk about comatose people, and the majority of these comatose people were old. We had some younger people, but the bays that I was assigned as a junior trainee consisted of old men and old women. Now, this coma floor was surprisingly busy because during the day there were a lot of visitors, and this surprised me, as you always hear about loved ones being abandoned since they've been in a coma for a long time, but maybe it's something to do with the area that I live in. Almost every coma patient had visitors almost every day. And then there was the cleaning, the massaging, the daily care. Now, it was pretty chill work, but hard and important work at the same time. And after a week, I was asked if I could cover the night shift for 3 nights. And of course, I said yes, because the night shift on a coma ward is honestly notoriously quiet, and I had a bunch of studying to catch up on. There were only 3 of us on shift during that 3-day block. I think there was supposed to be a 4th nurse, but they had actually called in sick and I never saw him. There was Yvonne, the charge nurse, and Soa, a junior nurse who'd passed her training. Not that this is in any way relevant, but Soa was one of the most beautiful girls I'd ever seen before or since, and part of me wondered if this is why she worked on that coma floor, to avoid the inevitable harassment that would have come her way on a bunch of other floors. Now, maybe I was just thinking too hard, or maybe I was just jealous. I was not the kind of woman who was going to win any beauty pageants or fit into any Met Gala outfits. I'm happy to add, though, that 10 years on the job has cost me 120 pounds, and I couldn't be happier. Now, I still can't do anything about my piggy-looking face, though, but oh well. I soon found out that working the night shift on that coma floor wasn't the quiet, relaxing chill-out zone that I expected it to be. The work was no harder than I expected. It was the usual emptying catheters and colostomy bags, taking patients' obs, that sort of thing, charting, etc., checking the machines were functioning and that nobody had secretly died while the machines happily beeped away. It was the human silence. None of the comatose patients snored. You couldn't even hear them breathing over the sound of the machinery, and a handful of them couldn't even breathe without medical aid, and I guess their loved ones couldn't bring themselves to switch off the machines. I don't even want to think about having to make that choice myself. It was my first night shift, and I was around 3 hours into the adventure. Yvonne and Soa had disappeared somewhere, and I assumed that they'd both headed toward the end of the ward, but I hadn't seen them leave, and they hadn't said anything. So it was just me, sitting at the nurse's station, trying and failing to force the contents of my textbook into my brain. Now, frustrated at my inability to learn, I glanced up to check that the immovable patient hadn't moved. Now imagine my shock when I saw a figure, dressed all in black, standing over the woman in the far right bed off the bay in front of the nurse's station. The figure was dressed entirely in black, not a cloak or some kind of death garb, but black workout pants, a black hoodie, and most notably black leather gloves. The figure was leaning down, whispering something into the woman's ear, who continued to sleep the sleep of the dead in her coma. And I convinced myself that the other nurses were pranking me and that this had to be Soa in disguise. It wasn't anything remotely like I expected from either of those two, though, and I think deep down I knew that the figure was a man. There was no way that I was even willing to consider any other possibilities, though, as I left the nurse's station and stepped into Bay 5. I called out to the figure saying that I wasn't falling for that prank, and he continued whispering into the old woman's ear as if he hadn't even heard me. Obviously, deep down, I knew that this wasn't something Yvonne or Soa would do. Now, one of the orderlies or the nursing assistants, maybe, and some of those guys could be freaking weirdos. I became even more certain that the figure wasn't Yvonne, who was nearing 300 pounds and was quite clearly not this slender black-clad figure, or Soa. Now, this was reaffirmed by 2 sets of footsteps coming from my distant left, heading from the direction of Bay 1, and Yvonne's voice calling out in the stage whisper that we adopted in the coma ward. Now, she asked who the heck I was talking to and what was going on. Now, I looked up, hoping that that black-clad figure had to be some sort of figment of my imagination. But of course not. He was no longer leaning down to whisper into the old woman's ear, though. He turned to face me, and I could see that under his black hoodie, he wore a black garment, sort of like a balaclava, but thin and not made of wool. I'm not even sure what those are really called. I started pointing at the black-clad figure who in my mind I had already taken to just calling death, and I started muttering and stuttering, trying to explain that someone was in here, but I have no idea what actually came out of my mouth. Almost nothing coherent, I'm pretty sure. Now, it must have been enough to alert Yvonne to something, though, because she started freaking out, and so did Soa. Not in a "there's a ghost on the coma ward, death has come for us all" type of way, though. She charged forward and began sort of whisper yelling at the intruder to identify himself immediately because security was already on their way. I don't think this was true, but he didn't know that. Yvonne ran forward and used her considerable bulk to manhandle this black hoodie guy away from the patients and into the corridor. That's when he began screaming that we wouldn't keep him from his grandmother, that we were stopping him from being able to say goodbye, and that the angels in his head would melt the flesh from this fat, unclean demon, which clearly meant Yvonne. Now, I was frozen on the spot like a complete useless fool. Soa had already ducked behind the nurse's station and called security, God bless her. Meanwhile, Yvonne was furious, and I'll never forget what she said. "You can call me fat, and you can call me a demon, but nobody calls me unclean," she yelled. And halfway to the elevator, the door opened and a handful of security guards emerged, followed by a neurology doctor. Now, this couldn't have been the security that Soa called because they appeared far too quickly. Now, the doctor quickly explained that this patient had been in an overflow area suffering a head injury that didn't appear too severe, but something had caused him to make his way to the ICU coma ward. Now, We later found out that his grandmother had died on this very floor after falling into a coma when the patient was just a child. Now, more gently now, Yvonne escorted the patient toward the doctor in the elevator, and the patient paused and removed his hood and that mask thing that he was wearing. And I don't know if it was the removal of that mask that caused everything to go to hell, but something did. The patient turned and stared directly at me. He made perfect, direct eye contact, and suddenly, blood began dripping from his nose, his ears, and most violently, his eye sockets. And then as I watched, the patient, whose name I still didn't know, had the most violent seizure I'd ever seen and collapsed directly to the floor. Everything felt like slow motion, but sped up at the same time, and the doctor pronounced that black-clad man dead right there on the scene as they tried to work on him. Now, the short version of this mild concussion he'd received had triggered some type of aneurysm in his brain, a weakening of his brain tissue that nobody could have even possibly predicted. Now, I'd love to say that the comatose woman he whispered to had made a full recovery, but she remained in her coma for another couple of years before also passing. The whole thing could have put me off being a nurse, but it didn't. It reminded me that so many people need our help, people who might appear sinister at first glance, people who are at the end of their lives. Everyone. We're all vulnerable to the inevitability of death, and I feel like it's my calling to try and help that transition feel a little easier for as many people as I can. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, LetsReadSubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul. Go check it out, as all the links are down in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, stop projecting. You remind me of my mean dad and my mean ex-boyfriend.